Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Dave Campbell, and you are listening to Clarity from Chaos. If you're new to the show and like what you hear, take a moment, go to my website on Substack. The address is https://dkc051952.substack.com. There you can listen to the archive shows, see upcoming guests, and click on the subscribe button. But before we get into this edition of Clarity, I would like to share a few thoughts. On Tuesday night, we all saw something that I would never dream of. A communist was elected mayor of the most powerful city in the world. The people of New York were convinced to have a Muslim Democrat socialist run the very city that was attacked 24 years ago by Muslim extremists. Tell me there's not evil afoot. As I will continue to say, we should ignore the political aspects of all this. The Marxist Democrat socialists have seized the moment, and unless we recenter ourselves and bring God back into our lives, we will continue to spiral downward. We need to bring the church and the Bible back. We need to defeat this threat spiritually, and we need to elect people who answer to a higher authority and not to the puppet masters they answer to today. So before we move on, though, I'd like to read a scripture, and this is from Ephesians 6:10-13. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his power. Put on the whole armor of God so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For our struggle is not against blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against authorities, against the cosmic power of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God so that you may be able to withstand on the evil day, and having prevailed against everything, stand firm. We are incredibly pleased to welcome back to Clarity the founder and president of the International Council for Men and Boys, Mr. Edward Bartlett. Edward is also a federal regulator at the Department of Health and Human Services. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. And if I can just slightly correct that, I used to be a regulator at the Department of Health and Human Services, and I did that for 17 years, and it was a wonderful experience. So that's now in my past. It's no longer in my present.
Okay. So we are now in a Men's Equality Month, the month of November, correct?
That is very correct, yes.
And what I have up here on the screen is what I would like you to go through are the topics that are part of the Men's Equality Month. And you can just start with number one, the education piece, Edward, and just work your way through it.
Yeah, sure, Dave. So if I can just make a couple of comments. So for literally decades, the narrative in our country has been that men have all the power, men are patriarchal oppressors, and B, that women are, universally oppressed by the patriarchal oppression, that women are just inherently victims in whatever sense of the word you want to look at. That has been truly the narrative that has dominated in our society, from my perspective, for 50 years. It's been a long time. And so we decided to actually look at the data, look at the actual numbers, look at the facts. We went to the World Health Organization, the World Bank, International Labor Organization. We went to authoritative sources, organizations. We wanted to look at the actual numbers, the raw numbers, and find out what the truth was. Well, the truth was the absolute diametric opposite of what people have been saying, this narrative that we have heard over and over and over again for the last 50 years, that it's always women who are victims. And I'm not going to use that word victim anymore because I don't like the word. I think it's overused. So we'll just talk about how men and boys are disadvantaged in a relationship in comparison to women and girls. And this is, we've looked at this issue not just in the United States. We have looked at this in over 25 countries around the world. Very similar findings around the world about this. So, if I may, I'd like to just
Sure.
touch on each of these 12 areas. Again, 12 areas of male disparity in relationship to women. So, we'll start with the education issue. We know that in the United States and in most countries in college enrollments, men are lagging behind women. When we look at health, again, and truly in every country around the world, men are dying on average about 5 years earlier than women. And if you look at the suicide rates, they're also, I mean, really stunning. I mean, something like 80% of all suicides involve males. Um, then let's look at the at boys and the so-called boy crisis, and the suicide issue actually begins to show with teenage boys. Teenage boys far more likely to commit suicide than teenage girls. And there's other areas of concerns with boys, but I'm just giving some of the highlights here. False allegations of domestic violence. We did a survey, a 4-country survey on this several months ago. In every country, we found that men were more likely to be the victims or the targets of a false allegation of domestic violence or child abuse or whatever.
Well, it's interesting on this one because this was in the forefront, Edward, both in the nomination of Kavanaugh and Trump lost a large civil suit, both
Yes,
and in both instances, neither plaintiff was able to document
that's the point.
any kind of real evidence of wrongdoing in either case, and literally in Kavanaugh's case came very close, completely ruining the man's career, his family, and everything else. Trump's a little different because I think he's got alligator skin, and he was able to fight it off, but he still lost the case, lost it again on appeal. But this false allegation is real important, and I don't think is probably looked at enough.
Or people kind of dismiss it.
Right.
They
Right.
dismiss it until they themselves are targeted, as with a false allegation, and all of a sudden, wow, they find out that there's no amount of evidence that they can produce that will dismiss or overcome this allegation. And I'll give you an example. One of the representatives in the U.S. Congress from South Carolina, her name is Nancy Mace,
Right.
MACE, and she stood up a few weeks ago and accused, I believe, 3 different men of sexually abusing her in a rather strange video. She also showed in the back of this video, she actually showed an image of herself wearing no clothes, but we won't dwell
Yeah.
on that particular part of it. But she provided no objective evidence. She didn't report this to the police for investigation. And so one of those 3 men has actually now filed a defamation lawsuit against her because he was just outraged by this false allegation.
Right.
Johnny Depp and Amber Heard is another example. I think that everybody's very familiar with that. So, yeah, a false allegation is not a trivial matter when you are targeted for that false allegation, and by any sense.
Right.
Going on to the next box, victims of violence, we know that if you just look at homicides, again, in virtually every country around the world, are 80%, constitute 80% of the victims of homicide. Parenting is another area. Many are not as aware of that, but the research on children needing their father figure in their life is so overwhelming that it's just amazing how many studies show that a child who does not have a father figure more likely to drop out of school, more likely to end up in trouble with the law. Uh, I mean, a whole series of social problems for the kids who are what's called dad deprived. So you would think that family courts would do everything in their power to assure what's called equal shared parenting, which means the father would get, basically 50-50. The kids would spend their time with the dad 50-50. And so to maximize the time, but of course, balance it with the mom. Well, feminists are
Right.
totally opposed to equal shared parenting. We can delve into the reasons of that if you want to later, but
Well, yeah, but it's interesting the amount of manipulation that's been going on, Edward, relative to the um, LBGQs and the gay community and everything else. And quite frankly, the whole now movement that was launched back in the early 60s was all geared towards stripping the male presence out of the family. And, now I think they're starting to see, well, I think that there's some drastic numbers now over the causal relationship with what has happened and the unintended, well, I shouldn't say unintended consequences because I think they were intended.
I totally agree.
I think they were absolutely intended. But what I
Yeah.
don't think they counted on was the beginnings of the pushback that we're now starting to see a little bit. I don't think they quite had counted on that. But you
Uh,
you can't tell me that a male child raised in a lesbian family gets the same kind of mentoring, male mentoring that he would get in a traditional family.
exactly.
And people don't want to hear that because it's so socially acceptable now to have the first example. And oh my goodness, this couldn't be a problem. But I know you and I have talked about the Bly book, Iron John, about all of the attributes that happen by stripping the father out of the family. The whole consequence of coming of a young man growing up and then going through, the ritual of becoming a man from boyhood. All of that has been taken away, and I think number 6 probably should be should be up like with number 1.
Yeah, yeah, you're making a very good point, and I many would agree with you on that particular point. Yes,
So
yes,
I just find it, like, and I started to say, unintended consequences. I don't believe that's true. I believe the stripping of the male, and you can just, all you have to do is turn on the TV and look at commercials and find the dad being the the slated moron, if you will, of just about every commercial. Poor old dad, he's an idiot, and
right,
just kind of shut up and go away, and mom's going to take care of it. And no, that's not the case. But
right.
apparently, unfortunately, that's where we're at.
Well, and actually, getting ahead of ourselves, if we look
Okay,
at box number 12, the media portrayals of men
okay, there
are
you go.
very
Yeah,
negative,
yeah,
and this is not just somebody's impression. They actually did a scientific study, and you can see that 69% of all media portrayals of men were unfavorable.
right,
Well, not only 12% were favorable. So just kind of think about that. And if you look at the image in that box, okay, this is from a newspaper in Australia. We didn't make this up. This was an actual front page story in this newspaper, shows a boy, maybe 12 years old. How do we stop this kid from becoming a monster? That's really
oh
the
my,
headline from the newspaper that illustrates the extreme bias.
yeah. And to
So,
me, whoever was responsible for putting that up on that particular paper in that manner ought to have been shit canned. I mean, the I can't even imagine what this the ripple effect of what this has done. It's just like I said in the beginning. It's nothing but pure evil, and it goes way back. But this kind of crap is just unfortunate. Not unfortunate. It shouldn't be tolerated. But
right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, at the very beginning, David, you talked about the spiritual crisis affecting our society.
right,
Well, this is a perfect example of that. To vilify, not one individual, but an entire class of individuals
right,
for reasons that are totally specious. that totally lack a scientific basis, that totally lack truth. This is happening. This is from Australia, but it's happening a lot
Globally.
in England and to
Yeah.
some extent in our country as well. So, uh, and if you're looking, I'm not afraid to use the word evil. The situation really is out of hand, and this is a prime example. If we can, let's go to number 7,
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
the criminal system. So there's been multiple studies that have looked at compared men and women who commit the identical crime, right? And then look at what are the chances of the man versus the woman being arrested, being charged, being convicted, and being sent to prison. On every one of those 4 key stages in the criminal process, the man is more likely to be, put through the, you know, put through the system and treated more harshly. I mean, there's no good basis for that. That's just sort of that bias is baked into the system. Number 8 relates to domestic violence, and this is one of the areas that often surprises people the most. We've been drummed in with this narrative of abusive men, but it turns out, and this is according to this U.S. Centers for Disease Control, it turns out that men are more likely to be victims of domestic violence than women. Uh, by there are about 1 million more men victimized by their partners than vice versa. Again, totally different what the narrative says. But bottom line is this is more of an equal opportunity problem, and but the sort of the societal narrative sort of ignores
Yeah.
female perpetrator of abuse. That's makes excuses like, oh well, she must have been abused as a child, or um, she was just having an emotional outburst or whatever. Well, the excuses are so common that they're laughable. Let's go on to number 9, homelessness. And we looked at this again internationally. We found that overall, 76% of all homeless persons are men. That somehow doesn't seem fair. Uh, when we look at the workplace, um, I think most people are aware that men are more likely to suffer fatal outcomes in the workplace than women. When men are working as loggers in construction, in other high risk
Right.
occupations. So it's not a surprise, but most people are not aware. In the United States, 93% of uh, of deaths, workplace deaths, befall men. So there's obviously a huge disparity there. Number 11 is a bit more controversial, but whether you agree with abortion or not, it seems to be only fair that that the father would have a role in making that decision. And it turns out, in fact, that men are more likely to be pro-life than women. But that's sort of a side comment. The point is, again, if this concept of gender equality is going to be sort of rule our society,
Right. Yeah.
well, heck, we should give fathers the same rights. Adoption is another example. In some states, kids are put up for adoption. If the mother can't care for the kid, in many states they don't even bother to ask dad. The kid is just put up for adoption even without informing the father. That just doesn't seem right. So, and then we've already talked about the media. So you put all this together, and you have to say, wow, this narrative we've been shoved down our throats for the last 50 years about the widespread female oppression. It ain't true. It ain't so. And some people would take this farther to say, this actually shows that there is no such thing as patriarchy, because if there was a patriarchy, well, those all-powerful patriarchs would be doing everything in their power to make sure that men could get healthcare services and could get into college and on through the list. But the reality is there is no such thing as patriarchy.
Right. Well, for people that are viewing the screen and have been listening, you can go out to the website, which is www.menandboys, all one word, .net, and you can go through each one of these modules, 1 through 12, and obviously click on the read more component and get more data and more understanding of each one of these modules. But this is terrific. And Edward, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Are we okay with that?
Yeah, sure.
That I haven't heard in the news, and we're almost a week into November, that this is Men's Equality Month, right? I've heard this is Black History Month. This is the Mango of the Week month. This is this month. This is that month. But God forbid we would talk about men's equality, right? Because it just doesn't serve anybody's narrative, which is bizarre to me, quite frankly. I don't know. Well, I do know and forgive me here. If you go back and read the Marxist ideology and everything else, the whole key component is to destroy the church and to destroy the family. And,
Correct.
With all of that, and, unfortunately, New York City decided that, that was going to be a good thing. So they're going to get to play in that experiment for a while. But nobody, and with the statistics and everything else, nobody wants to give men their due, because I think it's just a lot of, like, the LBGQ. Everybody, it's not a clique that is fancy that everybody can claim to be, right? They haven't positioned it, they haven't advertised it like it's really cool. They had this position, the mom in the home that wasn't working, that was supporting the family. The dad was out working, doing all this stuff. The poor downtrodden mom. God forbid that she was entrusted with probably one of the primary roles with raising an individual that could function properly in society. No, she needed to come out of the household, and then we had to create economies where both parents had to work, and the person that got to suffer from that was the children. So then we've gone through several generations of this silliness. And now we have children that's the norm, that mom working at home is bizarre. Nobody does that, right? Nobody sits at home, because where's your career? Where's your this? Where's your that?
Right.
The responsibility of raising a human being is secondary, right? It's all how you feel, what you do, and it's all skewed, Edward. It's just all skewed.
Well, an interesting part of this conversation, Dave, is that it's women, middle-aged women themselves, and I'm saying women in their 40s and their 50s, who are childless and have never been married.
Right.
I believe the number I recall was, by 2030, that 40% of all women in that age group are projected to be childless and having no husband. Think about that. I mean, many women and men as well, when they think about sort of where they're headed in their life, well, their ideal state is be married with 2 to 3 kids, having a little home in the countryside, and being able to relax in the front yard and
Right.
whatever. So that is the dream of many people. But all of a sudden, a lot of women in their 40s and 50s, of course, their biological clock has ended. They can't have any more children, and they've come to that realization, and they're pretty furious that that dream is never going to happen for them. And many of these women go on to say, and I really don't have that many friends. They admit that they are lonely in life. I'm the proud father of 3 boys, right? And I have a great relationship with them. And that's really important to me, to have that relationship. It's hard for me to actually imagine being a woman with having no children, and therefore no connection to your own progeny. So that's a big part. And I think we're going to see more and more of women in that age groups becoming openly disillusioned with this narrative.
Well, I think we're starting to see it now, Edward, because quite frankly, you could make an argument. You could turn on the View, and you could make an argument that there's an awful lot of angry women, right? And
Yeah,
why
clearly.
and why are they angry?
Yeah.
what has pissed them off to the point where they're at. And it's interesting. And the reason I bring that up is because Taylor Greene was on. Everybody thought it was going to be a running food fight for the whole thing. She was nice as can be. And now everybody's scratching their heads going, well, golly, we didn't get the opportunity to be angry and mad about something and so on and so on. And, here's this woman that's actually halfway decent to talk to and listen to and so on and so forth. So it screwed up everybody's paradigm, and it was just hilarious. Go ahead.
It is true that there are a lot of angry women of all ages.
Yeah.
I think the reasons are different in different ages. My sense is many of them don't have a clear understanding why they are feeling sort of having this existential anger. But if I had no kids, I'm also happily married. If I didn't have a wife, I'll be honest with you, I would feel very lonely in life. When you get past age 50 or 60, you don't want to feel lonely because it becomes a little bit harder to connect with other people.
Sure. What I'd like to get into now, though, is where we're going with this, because I was reading some stuff on the social collapse that could happen given we continue down this road and we don't make some alterations and start going another way. Comment, and we've talked about it earlier about Kavanaugh's reputation being drugged through the streets and everything else for no apparent reason. Trump's, and then you brought up Nancy Mace, all of these people, and it almost makes you wonder, and I don't want to discount it, but you've got this whole Gazelle, I can't think of her name, the guy that was running the Paradise Island for all of these diplomats. You almost have to wonder if that whole group of women, if it actually happened to them, because they haven't, or at least we haven't seen any evidence that would establish anything. It's just allegations at this point.
Right.
And I don't want to discount what did or did not happen. But when you see things like the deal with Kavanaugh, and it gives you pause, because so many people, are just willing to walk off the end of the pier with this stuff.
Right. Well, I agree with what you're saying, and part of this is I think all of us are trying to make sense of this enormous period of upheaval in people's self-identity and upheaval in relationships between men and women, which have clearly disintegrated in the last 10 years. And I think they've gotten even worse in the last year or so. But I want to point out an article that just came out just a few weeks ago. I'm going to hold it up for everybody to see it. The title is The Great Feminization.
By Helen. Yeah, Helen Andrews.
Helen Andrews. It is an extraordinary article because it points out, it gives example after example of, for example, the courts of law. And you mentioned Kavanaugh. There was no evidence of wrongdoing, but still feminists wanted him to lose his chance to get to the Supreme Court. She actually cites that type of issue where there is no evidence. And her point is that feminists, that's something that feminists push for. They call it the Me Too movement. And they also call it trauma-informed. Trauma-informed means always believe somebody who says they've been victimized. Well, that, of course, would destroy the concept of due process, which is one of the bedrock principles of democracy. So anyway, so she goes example through example of feminists who have really distorted key principles of society and key principles of getting along with each other, and over points out that this is, and she doesn't point it only at feminism. She says this is also partly just sort of the way women tend to interact with each other, a lot more sort of gossiping in the background, backbiting against people without that person ever knowing, until everybody in the office sort of is looking askance at this one individual. So I think there have been numerous other sort of fallout articles from the Great Feminization commenting on what she wrote, and almost all of them essentially agreeing with her point and expanding on them, maybe looking at the military. or other settings that she didn't talk about. So I think that, of course, this article is driving feminists crazy because it
Well,
undercuts everything they've been saying about, we have to have 50% of all CEOs have to be female. If not, obviously that's sex discrimination. So this is really a change, just a change in how we view these issues.
well, it's funny you bring up the military. Hegseth basically said, women in combat, women in the military, they just need to follow the same standards as everybody else. I didn't see a problem with that. But apparently, by their own admission, everybody was screaming about, well, how can women, have the same standards as men? Well, is that not your argument? Your argument is not we're all equal and we're just as studly as everybody else. Your argument is, we need to change the bar down to here because we can't reach the bar up here. And
Right. And it just shows how the claim of all we want is gender equality.
right,
Well, it just shows that is a dishonest claim. They don't want just gender equality. What they really want is gender uniformity. In other words, they want every CEO to be all CEOs to be female. They want half of all heads of state to be female. Right now, it's only 27% of members of parliaments around the world are female, and of course, feminists are furious about that. They say that's proof of structural sexism. Well, people are just getting tired of that argument. They know it's hooey and are pushing back against that.
well, it's interesting because I think it's going down the same path as climate change, Edward. I think, people bought into that horse shit for years and years and years, and it made John Kerry and several other politicians very wealthy, spousing off all of that crap. Well, not so much anymore, right? The founder of Greenpeace even came out and said, "There's nothing wrong with the damn climate. Quite frankly, the warmer it gets, the more food we can produce, and that means we have less hungry people."
Right.
So,
Have you ever been to Plymouth, Massachusetts?
no,
Well, if you go to Plymouth, Massachusetts, they have the original original rock that the original settlers there created, and they have old photographs of that rock, and they show how high the water is in relationship to that rock, and they have then photographs from then, and well, there's been zero rise of the seas on that particular rock, in the last 100 years, and another claim is that the countries that are small, small island countries like in the Pacific, there are a lot of them. They claim that most of them will be wiped out within 10 years. Well, again, that's just plain hooey. They have not been wiped out. These countries are doing perfectly fine. So, yeah, I mean, there's a whole series of shibboleths and narratives that have been put out there, and the narrative that we have to have 50% female in everything. That's just one of those narratives that's being
right.
put by the wayside.
Yeah, I think their whole push for this social engineering that they're ramping down on everybody is starting to slow, and I think people are the concept of common sense and being able to connect the dots and bring some normalcy back to the families and stuff is starting to take hold, except maybe in the extreme areas of the East Coast and West Coast where we all know that that's where the brilliant people live, and particularly in Washington. I mean, they're super brilliant in Washington. So, but I think the rest of us poor bastards in the middle part of the country and so on and so forth have come to realize that common sense needs to start to creep back in. And all of this foolishness has a direct impact. I mean, when they started attacking the kids and with the gender mutilation and all the other things.
Yeah, very sad.
Yeah.
Can we shift to Men's Equality Month?
Oh, absolutely. I was
Um,
going to get right to that. I
okay,
wanted an update.
great. So anyway, we start out by talking about the 12 areas of male disparity in the U.S. and around the world, which proves that there is no such thing as patriarchy. What it really shows is that we really have to do more to help men in a lot of different ways. My organization, International Council for Men and Boys, and I'll give you the website, www.menandboys.net, decided, well, we already have a whole month dedicated to women's issues called Women's History Month in March, and that's fine. We're not objecting to that, but it's only fair if men are lagging in these 12 areas, we should be giving at least equal attention to the issues and concerns and needs of men. So we said, okay, we'll call it Men's Equality Month, being held every year in November. We are an international organization, and we have groups all around the world in Africa and Europe and Latin America holding events. And I'll just share today, we were actually on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., meeting with staffers, talking about Men's Equality Month and some of these 12 areas of male disparity. And for some of the staffers, it was kind of a new concept and they didn't really know how to react. I mean, they were friendly and interested, but you can tell when a person is truly engaged in an issue,
Right.
or a person is being polite. And but there were staffers who, in fact, were very engaged. And I'll say both Democrats and Republicans. This is not a partisan issue. That a lot of staffers say, "My golly, how is it possible that we have teenage boys committing suicide?" And one of the questions that I was asking some of the staffers, I said, "Well, how are your kids doing? Are your kids doing as well as you would have hoped?" And that's sort of a good question to introduce the issue and
Right.
get people to think this is not a abstract scientific issue. This is a meat and potatoes issue. This is how affecting your family. When I talk to moms, often the moms say, "I'm having trouble with my daughter you know, finding a qualified male partner to connect with." I've heard that from a lot of women. So, again, this is a cross-cutting issue. It doesn't know boundaries of partisanship or fathers or mothers. This is something that we're trying to engage really the whole society to talk about this.
So they just didn't give you lip service, though. I mean, they actually, because I would think that the current administration would be very much behind this because
And they
obviously,
are.
quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised that Trump doesn't wade into this a little bit more. I mean, he's already waded into the LGBTQ stuff.
And DEI as well.
Yeah, and DEI as well. So I would imagine, you know, uh, if it gets to his desk, I would imagine that he's gonna start looking at it as well.
Right.
Uh,
Well, one of the things that we're working for is to establish a White House commission or a White House
okay.
council on boys and men. And it turns out if you go back to the era of Obama and Biden, they had a White House council on women and girls, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, hey, again, isn't it time that we talk about, having a visible White House entity that's there to draw attention to the disadvantages and disparities affecting men and boys? So that was one of the things that was being discussed in the last this earlier this week in Washington D.C.
Is there gonna be other events, Edward, as the month rolls through that you guys are going to be part of, be taking care, be sponsoring or whatever?
Well, I think I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit to answer your question.
Okay.
We had a we had about 50 people there meeting with staffers, meeting with White House officials and others on Capitol Hill. So that's a pretty impressive number. We had about a total of 50 meetings. Staff just today, we had about 50 meetings with staffers in the Senate and the House. And I'll just say it was considered to be an extraordinarily successful event. So yes, we're probably going to have a repeat. We haven't set a date yet, but I mean, we got so much good feedback. Again, Democrats and Republicans very much connecting and supportive of what we were saying. So yes, I think we will be coming back to DC before too long.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd like to see some kind of a formal announcement of, that November is officially, the Men's Equality Month. I'd like to see it go much, much further beyond than just, some kind of little committee. I'd actually like to see, RFK Jr., it would seem to me to be, it would kind of roll into some of the stuff that he's been doing too, that because there's a health component around this whole thing, both psychologically and physically.
Right.
And I just like to see him embrace it a lot more. I'd like to see him embrace, well, I think Trump has embraced the spiritual component of it,
Right.
but I'd like to see that. I like to see churches start to take up the banner that
Very much so.
November is Men's Equality Month. So all you ladies out there, start paying attention to your hubbies or your boyfriends or whatever. But it's Men's Equality Month, and I would like to, and quite frankly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to whisper in my pastor's ear that it's Men's Equality
Right.
Month, and perhaps he could put something together to have a little chat about that.
I think Charlie Kirk
Yeah, there you go.
had a huge impact on that. And of course, he was very outspoken on exactly these issues
Sure.
and talking about the importance of the family, talking about the harmful effects of feminism. I mean, he really was outspoken, and people are hearing that message and saying, yeah, he's right. He's got a point. So we're an increase. For example, you probably know that the feminists got into the Boy Scouts of America
Oh, yeah.
and the Boy Scouts to accept women, girls into Boy Scouts. Well, of course, that's emasculated the Boy Scouts. So now there's a new group. I think it's called Scouting USA. I could be wrong.
Yep.
But we are seeing kind of a grassroots movement of groups. Some are religious, some are more secular. But we are seeing an absolute upsurge
Yep.
of activities that kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think the whole LGBTQ thing, I think one of the possibly positive things that came out of that was a reset in a lot of people's heads, because they began to understand that they couldn't alter the biology, and that this was just kind of a small little clique that everybody could proclaim that, that their child was going through these treatments or whatever. And everybody was so afraid because of and I'm going to tie this back, the Marxist cancel culture, which I think is part of the social engineering that goes along with the feminism piece, got everybody to the point where they were afraid to say something about it, right? And stand up and say, BS, you're not having Bobby play on my daughter's volleyball team, and so on and so forth. But
And you're making an important point that I think we need to emphasize, is that feminist ideology can be traced back to Marxism and Marxist ideology. And let me explain
yeah,
what I mean by that. So when Marxists talk about the ultimate development of Marxist thinking, they're talking about what they call a communist society or a communist state. What is the communist state? Well, there's no hierarchy, and it's stateless. In other words, when they say stateless, it means there's no federal government. There's no state government. I mean, maybe there's a dog catcher or two, but when they say stateless, they mean no federal government. Well, think about that. Think about what the implications of that to really believe that. So, talking about the lack of hierarchy, feminists, we're trying to figure out how are we going to eliminate hierarchy, because there's always been different types of hierarchy in societies between male and female, and sometimes women are being the dominant individual. Sometimes it's the other way, but hierarchy is just sort of intrinsic in human societies. Well, how do you get rid of hierarchy? Well, one way to do that is to uh, just say arbitrarily, well, there really is no such thing as male and female, right?
right.
All there is 57 genders in between. There's fluid. You can take your choice. You can change that. So the whole LGBT, or I should say the whole transgender movement, came out of Marxist thinking and part of this non-hierarchical society. So it's important that we understand the origins of this ideology, because that's where they are pushing our societies to go.
Right. And we can all thank the giant cult cancer in this country called the media for promoting promoting, manipulating, and everything else, that whole idea, because that's exactly what they've been doing. They've you know they've manipulated the population. They manipulated them around COVID, which is the latest big example of convincing everybody to walk off the end of the pier. And so the LBGQ stuff, that's nothing to them. But people don't understand. People don't realize, Edward, that there's only that 40 years ago, the media had 50 some odd companies in it across the horizon. Today we don't have 50 companies, we have six. We have six companies that control all of the media in this country, both print, radio, television, and everything else. Six CEOs that basically controls the way this country thinks. And I don't think people really can have come to grips with that, because you have a very, very small amount. And what makes me kind of chuckle is we constantly bitch about the unelected politicians in Washington, the swamp, if you will. Well, you have that exact same thing with media, the media culture. They not only control what you hear, what you see, they're part of the whole gaming empire and all of that stuff. That needs to be corralled and controlled, or there needs to be more responsibility put around it.
And it's interesting, and what you're saying is obviously true. And there's a counter movement to what you're describing, David. It's a group of it's the podcasters.
Yeah.
It's the people who do Instagram media, and this has become a powerful force. We saw this with the Trump election. Joe Rogan, who was originally he was more liberal, but he started featuring Donald Trump, and that was a big factor in determining the outcome of the election. So the media landscape has broadened dramatically, and we have lots of people that have their own YouTube channel, for example. It's very easy to set up a YouTube channel and start producing YouTube. So this is another mind-boggling change in our society that we're seeing.
Right. So give the website, Edward, for the International Council.
So it's www.menandboys.net. We've already looked at those 12 areas of male disparities. We obviously have a lot of other material there. We have a whole page on Men's Equality Month. We list in countries all around the world that are holding events this month for Men's Equality Month. And I'll also mention that women are some of our strongest supporters. And so we have a couple of pages specifically dedicated to women who are vocal or speaking out on this issue. And I'll give you an example. The United Nations has had a program for years called E for She. E for She, meaning men who are speaking out strongly for women's issues. Well, guess what? There's now a counter movement called She for He, and we've actually traced it to the ambassador from one of the countries in Asia, and announced to the Human Rights Council, hey, our country, we're starting a She for He program because we want women to be much more involved in doing this. So, I'll share you an actual anecdote conversation with the staffer this morning on Capitol Hill. She was pregnant. She had her baby. The baby was 2 months premature. The baby was having some health problems, needed to be hospitalized. Things were getting really dicey there for a while. So the husband took time off from work, was spending time at home to support his wife and the newborn infant. Eventually, everything got cured and everybody got well. But it's sort of an example about this new movement of how fathers helping their wives, wives helping their husbands, and sort of getting out of these narratives of being victimized and so forth and so on. So it's just one example, an anecdote that one staffer, she shared with me this morning.
Oh, yeah. I don't want anybody that's been listening to our discussion, Edward, come away from this in total despair. Because I think, as I said, I think there's an awakening that you can it's almost palpable that people are starting to understand and elect to not put up with a lot of the nonsense that has been going on for the last 5 or 10 years. So I think there's a lot of things to be encouraged about. But by the same token, I think we need to recognize the evil for what the evil is and start and pay attention to combat it.
And call it out. We need to call it out and
Yeah,
call it spade a spade and not be afraid to speak truth to power.
exactly. So, with that said, though, it's been an absolute pleasure, Edward. Been an absolute
always.
pleasure. And
Yes.
we'll have you back on soon.
Okay. All right. So to all your listeners, happy Men's Equality Month. Go out and shout it from the rooftops, talk to your lawmakers, and just start thinking, what can you do individually in your life
Right.
to make it a reality to get over these disparities affecting men and fathers and kids?
Absolutely. Thanks, Edward.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.